So the talk, like I said, is called Rational Decision Making in a Pandemic, COVID-19 as an Epistemological Problem. So first of all, I want to say that, I never thought I was going to be, giving a talk like that, because, who had thought that? And I want to clarify that I am not a virologist, I'm not an epidemiologist, and I'm not even a microbiologist. So please don't take what I say as medical advice or anything like that, okay? But we will be, how do I say, treating this as a information problem. So what I'm saying is, in the last couple of weeks, I realized that I'm actually surprisingly suited for this because of my background. This seems to be like a mixture between a statistical problem and a cognitive science problem. So it's, or at least cognitive science and statistics, surprisingly relevant. So before we do anything else, let's get started with a review of the timeline. So this is a timeline of worldwide cases, okay? Not sure where there's a blue wiggle there. And so let's see. So I want to walk you through this a little bit, okay? So on the y-axis here is the cases, on the x-axis is the date. The first event on our timeline is on the 1st of December, there was the first confirmed case in Wuhan. A month later, China alerts the World Health Organization that there's an emergency and closes the food market that the early people who were infected by this, were linked to. Then 3 weeks after that, China locks down Wuhan. The Hubei province is locked down a day after that. And I think 10 more provinces are locked down after that. So at that point, something like 10% of the world population is under some kind of lockdown or quarantine. All right. Then on the 31st, the US declares a public health emergency and closes the air traffic from China. On the 15th, the US evacuates the Diamond Princess, a cruise ship that was docked in Yokohama. And then on the 24th of February, the stock market starts to drop. That means the start was the event stocks, travel stocks, hotel stock, cruise ship stock. And then after that, about a week after that, the rest of the market started to drop to like the entire rest of the market. Then on the 11th of March, events kind of escalate. The World Health Organization declares officially a pandemic. The NBA suspends their season, and Tom Hanks tests positive. And then 2 days after that, Trump declares a national emergency, and we're here now. When I made this, I made it with data from Sunday night. So I made this slide on Monday morning. This is data from the 22nd. At the 22nd, worldwide, we're up to about 350,000 cases. All right. Oh, let me ask you this, since I have you all here. What shape is this curve? Type it in the comments. Exponential. Yeah, as a matter of fact, there's actually two exponentials here. It's a dual exponential. The first exponential is the China phase of this disease. It goes from here to about the middle of February. And then in the middle of February, the global part of the pandemic starts. It starts here, and then it goes up. To put that into, and by the way, I should put that now, Playboy has stopped publishing a print edition, so things have gone really out of hand at this point. It's true, you can look it up. But anyway, so let's do the timeline of the US cases. As you can see here, in the US, nothing was happening for a very long time. I mean, it was like a handful of cases. And then recently, like in March, basically, things really escalated. We're now up to, actually, matter of today, I think we're up to 50,000 cases there. Why no log scale? That's going to be important in a moment, because I want to show you why this kind of messes with your perception. By the way, can you guys see this blue streak in the middle of the screen? Or no? It's just me. You can see it. I'm not sure what that is. Hang on, let me just take that off. I hope. Hang on a second. Where did that come from? I apologize, because that's going to be with us. And I don't know what app that is in. It's not in the. That's very odd. So anyway, so 1 second. There is like it's my zoom pin. How do I turn the zoom pin off? I did not turn this. I did not do that. I don't know. How do I turn the zoom pin off? So anyway, so let's just continue. We'll have to live with the blue streak, just ignore it. So anyway, so I was personally most affected so far by NYU moving to online teaching on the 10th of March. And that was just before this deluge of cases happened. And just to be clear, the remote teaching, how do I say this? Like the log scale, I have a point with that. But before I make that point, I'm going to ask you, and feel free to put that in the comments. When did you first realize that the situation is going to be serious? Like, put it in. Like, was it January, early February, late February, early March, mid March, just now, a week ago? Feel free to put that in, like mid to late February. Okay, so a lot of people realized it was going to be serious just recently, exactly. And out of curiosity, how did you realize it was going to be serious? If you wouldn't mind putting that in the comments, because I'm going to work with that. Okay, stability Asia, global cases, Reddit, Wuhan, Italy, work media, and nuclear storms. Okay, cities being shutting down, both the house. Okay, great. I see. Okay, and then finally, I'm curious. Do you personally know someone who has or had it? Okay, a lot of people, yes. Some people no. Okay, so let me tell you why I put the graph on the former slide on not on a log scale, and what I think is going on. Why this is so difficult to anticipate. So a lot of people only said they realized it's like in the last 2 weeks. It feels like, and you saw this in the graph, that everything kind of exploded in the last 2 weeks, and I call that experiential reasoning. There's, in my take, 3 conditions that make something real. What cognitive organisms do is they integrate information from a lot of sources to reach a judgment as soon as possible. Let me tell you experientially what I believe those 3 sources are. One, if you experience something directly, so you can be affected if it's affecting something that you care about. So for instance, I think someone just also mentioned in the comment, and a friend of me told us, like, when the NBA canceled their season, then they were like, whoa, now I know it's real, because they care about the NBA. 2, knowing someone who got it. It can be a celebrity. So my TA said, who's actually here on the call with us today, said when Tom Hanks got it, that's when he realized it is serious. And the 3rd one is you need to hear it from someone directly that you trust. And if you trust the media, that can be the media. So those are your kind of three ways most people, learn and navigate in the world when they do that. And let's just check if the media could have given you warning on that. So let me just do a little bit of a media review, particularly early on, and I try to be as unbiased as possible because I don't want to be accused of cherry picking. So on January 23rd, that's when Wuhan closed down. The New York Post had an article, "Don't buy the media hype over the new China virus." So that seems a little bit dismissive. The Los Angeles Times, "For Americans, flu remains a bigger threat than coronavirus." So basically, their take was like, don't worry about it, the flu is worse. And then the Washington Post on a week later wrote, "Get a grip, America." This is a pun. Grip is flu in German. "The flu is a much bigger threat than coronavirus for now." So they hedged a little bit. Then BuzzFeed News, always getting the important stories right. On the same day, basically, they wrote an article, "Don't worry about the coronavirus, worry about the flu." Then this is the New York Times 2 weeks later. "Coronavirus hits all the hot buttons for how we misjudge risk." And if you read the articles, basically, no one should be freaking out. This whole mass hysteria is overblown. Nothing's going to happen. Basically, worry about the flu. All right. So in other words, I'm going to tell you in a moment, you couldn't have outsourced it to news, because the news made you, as late as the middle of February, the New York Times told you basically worry about the flu. Then this is more recently Bloomberg. This is the 28th. Cass Sunstein, senior advisor to Obama administration, very senior guy, wrote an article, "The cognitive bias that makes us panic about the coronavirus." Basically, people are worrying about nothing. They don't understand probability, so they're worrying about the wrong things. And then as recently as 10 days ago, basically there's an article saying that it's just a panic, people are hysteric, it's a mass hysteria, that there's nothing to worry about. And just to be clear, the media has gone from complacency in like February to full-out panic in March, which is also not a good idea. But the reason I'm putting this out is with this whole experiential approach, you couldn't have outsourced this to the media and feel well informed because they got this all wrong. But you could say, hey, Pascal, is that you just, like, this is just hindsight bias that you knew this. It's just Monday morning quarterbacking. If you're so smart, where's your article? And I have to say, to be completely honest with you, I didn't think anyone was going to care about my take or interest in my take. That was number one. The second thing is that I frankly didn't think it was my place. As I said already, I'm not a virologist, I'm not an epidemiologist, and I'm not even a microbiologist. So I didn't think anyone was going to care or what I had to say, or I had anything valid to say. But I have since changed my mind because as a statistician and cognitive scientist, we do have something to say about quantitative epistemology. And so what I'm going to say next, I'm not saying to gloat. And I also want to emphasize that this is not hoarding. If anything, I gave the machine learning algorithms that underlie these sites an early signal so they could improve supply. So let me just show you what I did. I'm just showing this to you. This is not some kind of weird flex. I'm just showing it to you so you can see that I did see this coming. So on February 6th, I ordered emergency battery solar powered generators and cell phone operating things. And so basically, so that if the power goes out, then I would have power. This was February 6th. Then when I realized that China was not getting this under control, or at least I thought so, in middle of February, I ordered 6 big boxes of 36-ounce cornflakes. That's what my kids like to eat. So I was gonna have a year-long supply of cornflakes on hand. And then 2 days after that, emergency, freeze-dried 14-day emergency supplies. All right, and other stuff. This is just what fit on the screen. And I want to be clear. I was going to say, I wasn't panicked about this. I was just concerned. And I'm going to show you in the next slide why I was concerned. And at the time, and my wife will be happy to confirm this, her friends were mocking me. They're like, well, Pascal, you're just hysterical, or you're paranoid, or whatever. But now they don't have toilet paper, and I do. So, it is what it is. So, anyway, so the question is, why is this novel coronavirus a perfect storm for experiential reasoning, and what's the cognitive problem with it, and how can we do better? All right. So again, I want to show you this timeline, and I on purpose did not put these on a log scale because the whole point is people learn just by everyday life by learning from feedback. They observe the world around them. The problem is exponential growth prevents personal experience until it's too late, basically. Until the middle of March, you couldn't have learned from experience that this is going to be serious. And then all of a sudden it jumps up to like 30,000, 35,000, 50,000 cases. And so, and now you can't get toilet paper or anything like that. So basically you cannot do what you usually do, which is basically just gauge the situation as it is evolving. So the second thing is, often if there's a new thing going on and you have no experience with it, you rely on a prior experience. And people have prior experience with viruses that cause serious illness, like the flu. So the media was like, oh, this is probably just like the flu. We haven't seen this before, but the flu is a serious illness, so maybe this is just like the flu. So I'm not blaming the media. They did what came natural to them, or you have done. That makes sense. So likening the novel coronavirus to the flu is the natural thing to do. That's what the media did. They were basically saying it's a false alarm. They acknowledge that it's something new, but that it is in its effects much like something that we already know. Okay, but now we need to talk about my expertise, which is statistical reasoning. So there's kind of good news, bad news. So it is true that the flu is pretty bad. The flu is very serious, but from a statistical perspective, because it happens every year, we know what to expect from the flu. We know how bad exactly it's going to get. So let me show you what this is. These are numbers from the CDC that I graphed here. And I went back to 1976. Before that, there was different reporting requirements to compare apples with apples. What you see here is in the y-axis count. On the x-axis is the deaths per season. So once we had a flu season with 60,000 deaths. That was in 2016. Twice we had flu seasons with like under 5,000 deaths. There was 86 and I think 83. And other than and everything in between. On average, this is the median. On the average, the flu kills in the US. These are US numbers. In the US, the flu kills 25,000 people every year. And just to be clear, it's actually not trivial to count this. A lot of people that die from the flu, quote unquote, die from pneumonia that's induced by the flu. But never mind. I mean, this is counted as a flu-associated death. So let me give you the numbers. The R0, that's an epidemiological term. That means that's the number of people an infected person on average will infect. So this is R0 is a measure of contagiousness. All right. And the case fatality rate, that's the CFR. That means if you get the flu, you have a 1 in 1,000 chance of dying from it. So 0.01%. And as I said, based on the data from the last 40 years, we know that about 25,000 people can be expected to die from the flu every year. To put in context, travel accidents are at 35,000, so this is 2/3 of that. Twice as many people die from suicides every year, and about half as many people die from firearm homicides. Okay, so that's a serious problem, but we know exactly how serious it is, and importantly, it's not a systemic risk. Thousands of deaths are bad, but we're not talking about millions of deaths. The chance, given this distribution, to get millions of deaths is basically 0. But now we need to talk about COVID-19. And these numbers are out of China. So keep that in mind. We're going to talk about that in a second. That might not be 100% legit. We'll talk about why. Give me a second. So these are January numbers from China. They are not of COVID-19 is 2.5. And if you think about it, that's a lot more than 1.3. That's where you get this exponential growth from that we'll talk about in a moment. It's a highly infectious disease, highly contagious. Measles has something like 6, which is one of the highest. And this is particularly worrisome. The case fatality rate is about 2%. So this is a lot more contagious than the flu, and it's about 20 times more deadly than the flu. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh, this is not good. And so I put that into the context of the flu. So to put it here, so this is the graph. So this histogram, the graph that you just saw with these black bars, is now on the left here. And this is the expectation that we can expect of the number of people to die from COVID-19 if we do nothing, if we just let it run its course. So just shy of 2 million people in the US. And the assumptions here are conservative. So the assumptions are, if we don't mitigate this, and we assume that it's going to infect about 50% of the population, although they are not, implies about 70 to 80%. And the Wuhan case fatality rate is about 3.5. And the Italian case fatality rate is about 5% at this point. A 1% case fatality rate assumption is not that unreasonable. And so we would get, if we don't do anything, we get about 2 million deaths in the US. And that would be on track with worldwide deaths from the Spanish flu of 1919. So that's why it's not just like the flu. It's, if we don't do anything, it's a lot worse than the flu. But the irony is, if we take this seriously now, we can effectively turn it into a bad flu in terms of mortality. So this is now what we could get if we don't do anything. And the green line is what we can expect to get if we do something, or like if we mitigate this. And I'll talk about mitigation in a second in detail. But basically, at that point, it would be like a bad flu with, tens of thousands of deaths, but not millions of deaths. That's a 2 orders of magnitude difference. So we have it in our power to make this 100 times less bad than it could be otherwise. All right. And I'm sure, by the way, yeah, I will see if I can respond to the comments in real time, but if I can't, feel free someone else that is listening in to respond. And well, by the way, for those of you who joined late, we'll do the big Q&A about anything that's not a clarification question at the end, where we turn the mics back on. And so I'm sure you've seen the slide that's coming up now, but that's what I just said is mitigation is the rationale behind flattening the curve. So some people could say, well, why should we take serious mitigation measures and kill the economy if millions of people will get it anyway? The downside is obvious. It hurts the economy. And as you probably know, every 1% increase in unemployment rate can be expected to kill 40,000 people by diseases of despair, addiction, things like that. It disrupts lifestyles. As a matter of fact, the fact that we're doing this talk over Zoom right now, that disrupts our lifestyle. The fact that my kids were not daycare but at home disrupts our lifestyle. And a lot of people from this social distancing feel social isolation. They feel lonely, they feel sad. Someone in Manhattan already jumped off the window, out of the building, citing quality of life concerns. All right, so let's talk about the upside. This is a figure from the CDC. And what you see here is if we do nothing, on the y-axis, is number of cases, on the x-axis is the time since first case. If you do nothing, then we've got this surge of cases right now that's going to overwhelm our healthcare system capacity. And so the idea is we need to delay this. We need to buy time by delaying this as much as possible. So even though we'll have the same area under the curve with the protective measures than without the protective measures, if we stay under this healthcare system capacity line, we can prevent the cases, the infections, from turning into fatalities, into deaths. Just to be clear, what the bottleneck is, ventilators. So 20% of the cases seem to require hospitalization, and some of those are serious. If you have a serious case in the hospital, you will need a ventilator or you will probably die. So ventilators are the big bottleneck. The US, to my knowledge, has 100,000 ventilators and 10,000 in a strategic reserve by the military. Italy has like 5,000. And so that's where you get serious fatalities. The same thing in Wuhan, they ran out of ventilator space locally. And just to be clear, it doesn't mean you can't die. If you get a ventilator, the probability is just lower. Someone just said elders, immune compromised. That's true. You can still die if you get a ventilator, it's just much less likely. So the strategy is we need to delay infections to prevent cases, infected people, from turning into fatalities. Someone just asked about overestimates. We'll talk about that absolutely. Give me a second. I'm going to get to all of that. So, but first I want to talk to you about the mathematics underlying this. Why and how does this work exactly, this infections calculus? So as we already saw, the exponential function is underlying this, and that comes from exponential growth. Briefly, the equation for that is new cases are calculated as the growth rate times existing cases. So this is quite nefarious. How many new cases you get depends on how many existing cases you have. So if you have 10 existing cases and the growth rate is 30%, you can expect to get 3 new cases. You might think it's not a big deal. But if you have 1 million cases that exist and the growth rate is still 30%, you're going to have 300,000 cases. So we need to distinguish linear growth, where you add a constant value from day to day, and people's cognition is unbelievably well suited to that. If tomorrow you add the same constant number that you added yesterday, people have amazing intuitions, expectations for that. Unfortunately for us, exponential growth, you multiply with a constant, the growth rate from day to day. So I plotted some scenarios for you. So imagine if you had 100 people, just like we are here now in this Zoom congregation on day 1. And I will show here how many cases that 100 cases us, let's say we're all infected. How many cases would that turn into within 1 month? At a growth rate of 10% day over day, those 100 cases would turn to about 1,500 cases. That's not great, but it's not terrible. At a growth rate of 0.2, those 100 cases, us, would turn into about 20,000 cases. Growth rate of 0.25, those 100 cases turn to about 60,000 cases. Now we're talking. And at 100 cases, we would infect within a month at a 30% growth rate 200,000 cases. That's a lot. So this is why this is so nefarious. Small differences in growth rate can severely impact how many cases you end up with. And by the way, in the US, we're right now at 0.35. So that's why things are moving. We are 0.35. 0.35. I'm putting in some comments. Sorry. 35%. Okay. So the name of the game then is to turn the exponential into a logistic function. And logistic function is a sigmoidal function. It's an S-shaped curve. And I will just show you how to do that. The way you do that is you need to drop the growth rate sufficiently. And let's go revisit our equation. New cases are growth rate times existing cases. But here's what's important. The growth rate decomposes into two factors. But let me first show you what it looks like if we manage to do that. Let's say we start with the same 0.3 growth rate just now. And after a month, the 100 cases don't turn into 100,000 cases, they turn into 7,000 cases. If we manage to decelerate the growth rate that we started with, 0.3, then we will, after 30 days, turn to 7,000 cases. 7,000 cases is not, great, but it's not terrible, much like the 4.2 Röntgen. So it's not catastrophic. By the way, this point here is the inflection point. Ironically, at that point, you have the maximal number of new cases, but at that point, once you reach that and it drops after that, you will get about twice as many cases as you have at that point. But let me tell you how that decomposes, this growth rate. And this is where these mitigation measures come in. The growth rate decomposes into two factors. A, that is how many people an infected person is around. I should probably call that C for contact. Like how many other people an infected person is around. That's A. And P is how many of those A's turn into infections. What is the probability of anybody of those people who we just met to become infected themselves? Okay. And so there's now two knobs, two dials we can turn. We need to turn down the growth rate by turning down A and P. How are we going to turn down A? But this is our new equation. New cases are A times P times existing cases. I'll explain the things in good questions in the comments. I'll explain that afterwards. By the way, so let me say this again. Put in the comments clarification questions. Bigger question like, what about this, what about that? I will answer in the Q&A afterwards, because I'm going to get to a lot of the questions that were answered already. Anyway, so lowering A, that's the first knob. There's three measures that we have. Oh no, don't worry, bring in the comments. It's great. I'm just saying I can't respond to all of them right now. So one is social distancing. Testing is going to be very important in a moment. The idea is, if I can test you, and someone just asked about asymptomatics. Asymptomatics is a problem because you can still spread this if you're walking around, if you don't even know you're infected. But if I can test everybody and know who is infected, I can basically take those infected people and put them into quarantine, and then I drop the A to 0. Oh, let me ask you this. Let's say I drop the A to 0. What happens to this whole term if I turn the A to 0? 0 times P times existing cases is 0. Yes, if I can test people and I put them in quarantine, I can drop the new cases to 0. Okay, so that's our options for lowering A. We'll talk about tests in a moment. So three measures that I know of: social distancing, testing, quarantine. What about lowering P? Hand washing, no face touching, and masks. Those are the three things that I'm aware of that help with that. So that's the rationale behind that. Contact tracing. Contact tracing goes with testing. And just to be clear, here's some good news. This can work. China did this with a central quarantine. Let me tell you what a central quarantine is. In late January, early February, the CCP went from house to house, and if you had symptoms or if you tested positive, you went with them and you came with them to this central quarantine. And you stayed there until you either died or got better. And in New York is setting up a central quarantine, to my knowledge, right now in the Javits Center. So, and let's see if that worked. Look at this. They had on the 4th of February, they had the highest number of new cases, 3,878 in one day. And this is their inflection point. Oh, look at that. What is the shape of that curve now? They had 80,000 cases in March 1st, and they have 80,000 cases now. What is the shape of that curve? Anybody? Put in the comments. What is the shape of that curve? They had an exponential by February 3rd. Oh, it's a sigmoidal. Yes. So just to be clear, the exponential function and the sigmoidal function look the same in the first half, but they managed in early February to turn the exponential function into a sigmoidal function. So this can be done. But to be clear, they took dramatic action, and action that you can see from space. Let me walk you through this. What you're seeing here is satellite measures, American satellites, of nitric oxide. That's a pollutant. And this is the situation in China in January, before the lockdown. Look at that, lots of pollution. This is the pollution in China in February. Oh, look at that. Everything's shut down. The whole country is shut down. Hong Kong is shut down. South Korea hasn't shut down yet. And I guess North Korea, there's no difference before or after. There's not much going on there, I guess. But China is shut down, not just Wuhan, all of China. So that's what they did. They took dramatic action. Now, the good news is, so the question is, do we have to shut down our whole country for a month, everything to do this? And the answer is no, we don't have to. Another way to do this, that's what South Korea did, is massive testing. I'm, by the way, not sure exactly where South Korea had these tests from, but that's what they did. Let me walk you through what they did. Oh, actually, let me ask first you that. You see, this is the South Korean curve is about delayed by about a month. So they had the inflection point in a month later, on the 4th of March, not the 4th of February. But what is that? Y-axis is cases. Y-axis is cases. Thanks. What is that? What is that? Great clarification question. What is that shape of that curve? What is the shape of this curve? What is the shape of this curve? A sigmoidal S-shaped curve. So yes, the South Koreans were also able to turn that into a sigmoidal curve, as S-shaped curve, without shutting the whole country down, because they had a lot of tests. Let me tell you how that works. The challenges of this virus is the majority of cases, something like 80% of the cases, the spread of the disease is asymptomatic. So someone who doesn't have the disease is still still can transmit the disease. That's, by the way, why SARS was comparatively not such a big deal. SARS-1, 8,000 people got it, 800 people died. But only people who had obvious severe symptoms were actually spreading it. Okay, so you could quarantine those people. So because of the asymptomatic spread, mass testing is critical to control this factor. Now, you might ask yourself, why didn't we do that? Why did the US not have any tests in February? Here's why. The CDC did not have a working test in February, in all of February. So on February 5th, they rolled out their test, and it did not work, period. It just didn't work. Then they were scrambling throughout February to make a new test, but the new test had to be FDA approved. And that took until late February, 29th or something like that, to get approval. To be clear, and that's what led to the delays in US testing. To be clear, this red tape was put in place after the swine flu epidemic with good intentions. The idea was a bad test that has too many false negatives and too many false positives is actually worse than no test. So they wanted to make sure that they approve, that they have close control over the test. Nobody can use a test that's not approved, and only the CDC can let the tests out. Does that make sense? And just to be clear, lack of tests is actually common. I don't know how the South Koreans did this, but even China does not have enough tests. At some point in February, they just diagnosed by symptoms, not by test. So lack of tests is common. Japan has very few tests. France has very few tests. Sweden, Germany. So I'm most familiar with the situation in Sweden and Germany. In Sweden and Germany, to this day, to today, you can't get a test unless you are either in a high-risk area or you have serious symptoms. So that's going to be important in a moment. But in most of the world, there's very few tests. India, almost no tests. Most of the countries in Africa, almost no tests. So the few countries where we have mass testing, like South Korea, are actually, or Italy now, are actually in the minority. Most countries do not have enough tests. Okay, but there's also good news here. There's now evidence that Americans are starting to take social distancing seriously. Let me tell you what you're looking at here. These data comes from OpenTable. OpenTable is an app where you make reservations. And what you're looking at here is the relative percentage change to a year earlier. So on February 18th, 2020, in Indianapolis, there was 52% more reservations than on February 18th, 2019. In San Francisco, it was already 15% down, but overall, there was no net decrease. On February 25th, there was a huge increase in New Orleans, Mardi Gras, 102% increase over a year before, and no real decrease. So in February, basically, if you look at these numbers, nobody in the US was taking it seriously. By early March, oh, okay, it's down. Phoenix, San Francisco, 59% down in New Orleans. And then you see over here, March 10th, you see serious decrements, 43% down in San Francisco, 37% down in Orlando. And then now, March 17th, 100% LA, 100% San Francisco. The cities are shut down. No reservations in LA and San Francisco, San Diego, Denver, Washington, and all the ones down here. The only ones who are still open seem to be in Florida, Tampa, Miami, Orlando. What's going on with the Florida man down there? Fort Lauderdale, amazing, and Hawaii. All right, and it's not just restaurant data. This is trips data from cell phones, where 100 is typical. As you see here, from the 9th to the 15th, there was basically no. I mean, there was a lot less trips, but not a lot less. There was less trips, but not a lot less. So New Yorkers still made 67% of their typical trips. LA 70%, and even worse in Canada. Canadians went over about their business like it's no big deal. But then on the 21st of this is March, it's now down 10% in New York, 10% in San Francisco, LA, Seattle. The Canadians are still going strong, but maybe they'll also get the message soon. So there's evidence that social distancing is starting to take real effect. But it took until the second half of March to do it. So far, the AA value in that growth factor exponential. So we talked about numbers to dial down the A, quarantine, testing, and social distancing, okay? So let's talk about the P value, what you can do to reduce infections. So from that, so that the people around you that you meet don't turn into cases. And the first thing we need to talk about is hand washing or face touching. And let me be very clear, I am not a virologist. So this slide right here, I'm least comfortable about or confident with, but let me just go through it. I was told that the virus enters the body mostly through mucous membranes, so like the things on the inside of your nose. And here's the thing. The eye drains into the nasal cavity via the nasolacrimal duct. I can't even say that. Did you know that? So let me show you what that is. Say you have the virus on your hand and you rub your eyes. Oh no, look at that. The eye drains into the lacrimal sac, and the lacrimal sac drains into the nasolacrimal duct, and that drains into the nasal cavity. Oh no, you can get a lung infection from rubbing your eyes. I did not know that. Did you know that? So maybe don't do that in the future, like right now. You knew that, yeah. We have some MDs on. So, but here's the catch. If someone who is infected coughs, droplets that contain the virus will fall on surfaces. And I have kind of bad news for you. So this fallout is infectious. And I'm not gonna say the virus lives on the surface because the virus is not technically alive, but it can be viable, meaning infectious for prolonged periods of time. So someone did a study on that. Let me walk you through that. So let me tell you what you see here. In blue here is SARS-CoV-1. That's the original SARS from 2003. And on top here in red is SARS-CoV-2. Just to be clear, SARS-CoV-2 is the virus that causes the disease, COVID-19, just like the HIV virus causes AIDS, okay? And so let's see what they did here. On top here is the titer. We'll talk about titer in a moment. And down is the half-life. So on copper, the virus does not live very long. After an hour, half of the virus particles are no longer viable. On cardboard, it's like 3 hours. Stainless steel is like 6 hours, and plastic is like 7 hours. But it's the half-life. How long does it take until they're no longer like infectious? Longer than you think. Copper, it's like 3 hours. Cardboard, it's like 10 hours or more. So be careful with those Amazon boxes. Stainless steel is like a day, and plastic is like 2 days. So wipe down those surfaces. By the way, nothing I say here constitutes medical advice. So if you touch your cardboard an hour after that, after 10 hours and get sick, don't sue me. This is not medical advice. This is from the paper. But careful with those Amazon boxes. And the news gets worse. So they didn't just do this with surfaces. Wipe them down. Aerosols. The virus is viable in aerosols. What does that mean in English? Yeah, food delivery. Write that down too. What does it mean, aerosols? Yes, a dog had it. A dog had it. Got a copper stick. Yeah, do that too. Personally, I would be curious about silver, actually. Silver has other antimicrobial properties, so the question is that silver also killed the virus. But anyway, what does it mean that aerosols also have viable virus? What does that mean in English? Yes, it can be spread through air. Oh no, we need to talk about masks. We need to talk about masks. What you see on this, yeah, first of all, stay away from people. Number two, let's talk about this graph here from paper. Effectiveness, and for good measure, they put in 3 S's to emphasize that it's serious. Effectiveness of household materials at capturing virus size 0.02 microns. So this is 2 micrometers particles. Oh, look at that. A regular surgical mask, not even an N95 mask, does prevent almost 90% of the particles from spreading. If you don't have a surgical mask, you can use a vacuum cleaner bag. That's adventurous. Or that works almost as well. Or a pillowcase, or a t-shirt, or a scarf. So basically, what you see here is the masks worked, or work. And here, this is from a paper from 2013. There's these 2 graphs. Let me just parse that for you. The masks filter all coarse particles, and they filter most. Yes, they lied to you, Franklin. They filtered most fine particles. By the way, this is a log scale. So for this is actually put in quotation marks. This is a quote from the actual paper. Overall, masks produce a 3.4-fold reduction in viral aerosol shedding. So yeah, I have kind of bad news for you. They lied to you, but they said they did it for a good purpose. Let me tell you why. The statement that came out of the CDC was something like that. Number 1, the masks don't work. Number 2, you need to leave them for the medical professionals who need them. Are these 2 statements can they both be true at the same time? And no, that is not possible. But they said they had to say that, otherwise people would be hoarding the masks, and they did need them for the medical professionals. So yes, the bad news is the masks work and worked. And I would recommend, if you go out where people are, you should probably wear them. That's at least what I would recommend, if you have them. If you don't have them, I guess you have to make do with a vacuum cleaner bag. All right, but yes, so the masks did work. What about shaking hands? Well, I don't know how you feel about this, but let me just walk you through the graph. On the y-axis here is % relative spread of viral particles relative to a moderate handshake. That's at 100% here. So a strong handshake is worse, so maybe don't do that. And then high five, prolonged fist bump. The way to go is a fist bump, or if you don't want to do that, probably an elbow bump. But this was before they realized you could do that. But the fist bump is about at 20% of what a handshake is. And if you do the handshake, wash your hands. So far we talked about dialing down the A, dialing down the P. Let's talk about what we do and do not know about the virus. We know a lot. There's a lot we don't know. Let's maybe first start with what we do know. So first of all, we know a lot about factors that affect mortality rate. So let's look at the numbers on the left. This is from the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention. That's the Chinese version of the CDC. So let's look at this. This is the age group 10 to 19, 20 to 29, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, and 80 plus here. Death rate. How would you characterize this? The mortality rate, the fatality rate is a function of what do we put in the comments? Age, yes. It's highly age related and in an exponential fashion. The good news is, and it's going to become important in a moment, look at that. If you define a child as someone under 10, no child has died from this. No child has died from this. So should you blow this off if you're young? No. Why not? Because number one, I'm sure you know people who are old, like your parents or grandparents, and you probably don't want them to die. So you should take this seriously. Number two, you could have pre-existing conditions, which I'll talk about in a moment. Let's talk about biological sex for a second. This is biological sex, male, female. Let me walk through these two columns. On the left here is confirmed cases. That is like people who are confirmed to have it from the test. And this is all cases, meaning people who are classified as having the disease from the symptoms, but they might have just have the flu. So what do you see here? Who dies from this? More. Men, yes. But is it the biological sex, or are there confounds? What could be a potential confound of this?
Men smoke more, that's for sure. Men are less healthy in general. Men wash their hands less. Men work harder. Maybe they're more stressed out. I mean, work harder, I mean with like physical labor. So they might be weaker. So yes, what about pre-existing conditions? There's no, speaking of reporting, probably not. This is death. So death is hard to hide. You can probably hide cases easier, but death is hard to hide. So if you look here at the death rate, it's particularly bad if you have pre-existing conditions. 13.2 for cardiovascular disease, diabetes. By the way, some people say it's hitting the US so hard right now because of diabetes. We have a very vulnerable population in terms of diabetes. Chronic respiratory disease, hypertension, cancer. If you have no pre-existing conditions, the death rate is only, quote unquote, 0.9%. So someone asked in the comments earlier, why do young people die? Probably, because these people that died at 20, 29 had pre-existing conditions, okay? Now, let me tell you about a couple of things that I wish I knew, but don't know. The first thing I would like to know is, and I have looked far and wide for this number. I looked for like a week. I asked experts, no one knows. What I want to know is how reliable are the tests? What is the false positive rate? What is the false negative rate? What that means in English is, if someone doesn't have it, what is the probability for the test to indicate that they have it? Whereas if they do have it, how likely is for the test to miss that? And I suspect, but just to be clear, we don't know. But I suspect that the tests are not perfectly reliable, and let me tell you why I think that. For instance, have there been many celebrities and politicians been tested positive with the virus? Put that in the comments. Have many celebrities and politicians tested positive from the virus? Yes, many have. Has any one of them died from it? No, no one has died from it. So that suggests to me that there's some well, someone says it's like privilege, and of all people, the Florida man, but there's no treatment, so how would money help? Anyway, so the second thing I would like to know is, why are there such dramatic differences? What old playwright? Why are there such dramatic differences in cases and mortality rates between countries? So here's what's strange. And this is the top 12 from the case count. So if we take China as our like gold standard, we have 80,000 cases and 3,200 deaths. Italy has a lot less cases, but more deaths. Germany has half the deaths of Italy, but 50 times less deaths. Half the cases, but 50 times less deaths. The US has less cases than Italy, but 10 times less deaths, and all combinations thereof. So Iran has less cases than Germany, but more deaths. So there's dramatic variations in cases and death rates. And if you looked on the other side, so the bottom of this table, like at India or countries in Africa, there's almost no cases. Why is that? And just to be clear, and I see this, you guys mentioning this in the comments, this is probably going to take years to sort out why that is. I'm just going to throw out some possibilities. Weather is different, obviously, between those locales. Cultural habits. Some cultures get up close and personal and hug, like in Italy. Others, they're doing social distancing anyway. Demographic structure. Some countries are old, like Italy. Did you know that in Italy, the median age is 45.5 or something like that? If I move to Italy, I'll be a young man again. I'm not here, I'm over the median. But in Italy, I'll be young again. Other countries have less old populations. Healthcare system is an obvious difference. As I mentioned, Italy has 5,000 ventilators. We have 100,000. Test availability. To my knowledge, tests were only really available in South Korea and Italy, and now in China, maybe a little bit in UK. Genetics, we'll talk about it in a moment, but the virus enters the lungs through ACE2 receptor, and different demographics, different ethnicities do have different densities of these ACE2 receptors. Ways of counting cases and deaths. So actually, Avery, I've got a bad news for you, so in the comment. If you die of the disease, if you have a pre-existing condition, say heart disease, and if you die of the disease in Italy, you count it as dying of COVID-19. To my knowledge, if you have a pretty serious condition that you would have died of anyway, but you happen to have COVID-19, the Germans will count that as you died of the other thing. So different countries count that differently, okay? Hygiene, there's dramatic differences in pre-existing levels of hand washing and all that in different cultures. Travel patterns, it is probably not a coincidence that Italy and Iran were hit so hard to begin with, because they're part of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, as you know, and other things, some of which we'll talk about in a moment. Malaria proneness might matter, as I'll show in a moment. One thing that we do know, and this just came out yesterday, is more testing will yield more cases. Okay, that's maybe not the most revolutionary observation, but it's true. If you look here, and by the way, this comes from the World Bank. I apologize for the legend. This is not true. Singapore is not in North America. I apologize. That's just straight up from their website. But if you look here, if you test more, and on the x-axis here is GDP as a proxy for testing, if you can test more, you will get more confirmed cases. Do you see that? So lots of cases in Switzerland, Norway, Iceland, San Marino, per capita, Italy, almost no cases in countries in Africa, India, Pakistan, Philippines. What do you think this means, just looking at this? More testing, more cases. What do you think this means? Just looking at this. Yeah, less testing, less cases. Let me challenge you. What if I told you, I mean, this is a thought experiment. What if I told you that we all, right here, we already have the virus? Would it be a good thing or a bad thing? That would be a really good thing. Why would there be a good thing? Because it means that the virus can live among us undetected. This probably means that lots of countries in Africa already have the virus. They're just not testing for it. But it can be there without notice. That means it's probably a lot less lethal than we thought it is. For instance, a lot of these African countries here are also part of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. There's no way they don't have cases. They just don't know that. All right. So that's good news. Let me tell you about more good news. One reason for hope is the effect of temperature. Let me walk you through a paper that just came out on the 10th of March. The paper's title was High Temperature and High Humidity Reduce the Transmission of COVID-19. It was revised a week after that. Let me show you what they did. This is from the abstract. They basically looked at 100 Chinese cities and saw if the R value that we just talked about, this R naught, is affected by temperature and humidity. All right, and they found that it is. Let me just show you the figures. This is in China. On the top panel is temperature, on the bottom panel is humidity. What you see here is if the temperature is higher within China, the R value was lower. If the humidity was higher, the R value was lower, although the slope is a little bit less steep. And they did that also for world. So this is like countries, Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia has low R values, cases per day, sorry. And on the y-axis, so yeah, on the x-axis is temperature here, on the y-axis cases per day, and down here is humidity and cases per day. So no, cause this, you cannot do causality here. This is a regression. You cannot infer causality, but that doesn't keep economists from doing that every day. That's all they do. So yeah, let's not get into causal inference right now, but briefly, you know how the Singaporeans are bragging about their testing and their hygiene really helped? Well, it probably didn't hurt, but what probably also didn't hurt was it's really hot, like 90 degrees, and really humid. So maybe that helped too, right? And here's something cool that they did. They extrapolated these R values to the world. So on top right now in March, and down here in July. So look at this. The R values on the y-axis here is like in red, high R values, so highly contagious, and on down here in green, low R values. And look at that. It kind of replicates what we see. Japan has a lot of cases. Europe has a lot of cases. Scandinavia is drowning in cases, and we have a lot of cases in North America, but basically very few cases in the southern hemisphere. India, Pakistan, down here, Southeast Asia. But look at that. I know you guys are worried about winter coming. It looks like summer is coming. And if the summer comes, oh, look at that. the R value will drop in North America. It will reverse. The R value will drop in the US and Europe and Japan and China and India. I guess India will stay like that, to stay hot and humid, I guess. But the point is that there is reason for hope. It is possible that the increased temperatures in summer will basically do this. Now, someone said already, this is probably not causal, but let me tell you why it might be. And I want to be clear, I am not a virologist, but let me tell you how I think of viruses. As far as I'm concerned, a virus is just a piece of code, RNA, but it's not just by itself. It is wrapped in a lipid layer, just like your cells are a lipid layer. And on that lipid layer are like spike proteins. And the virus uses spike proteins to infect your cells. And so the idea is that a virus is literally the bare bones. There's nothing there except that a piece of code in RNA, lipid layer to keep it all together, and spike proteins to infect you. Okay, now here's the thing. Let me ask you this. What does soap do? What does soap do to the lipid layer of these viruses? What would soap do? Which is, by the way, when you wash your hands, you should wash your hands with soap. It breaks down the lipid layer. Yes, let's do that. Oh no, for the virus. There you go. The lipid layer is dissolved and the spike proteins can no longer hold on. Now the viral DNA stands before us naked. It has been rendered harmless. It can no longer hurt you. Okay? So basically, the heat might help for the same reason that hand washing helps. It dissolves by drying up the lipid layer. And note how the areas where there's less air conditioning, like India and countries in Africa, have least cases. Okay, so let's talk about some other prospects. Another reason, of course, to flatten the curve is to allow for treatment options, right, to become available. But I have kind of bad news for you. If SARS is any guide, a vaccine against the novel coronavirus is not in the cards for another year plus. Because let me ask you this, SARS happened in 2003, 17 years ago. Do we have a working vaccine against SARS? Do we have one? No. Was it for lack of trying? No. Coronaviruses are very, very hard to make vaccines against. I was told. I'm not a virologist. But the only way to accelerate this is if we relax. Oops. Hang on a second. How do I turn off the... I did not make the whites, the yellow streaks. How do we turn these yellow streaks off? I don't know. So, sorry about that. So anyway, so let's see. Sorry, let's backtrack. So unless we relax the safety and testing protocols, we're not going to see a vaccine earlier than that. And I'm not sure if people are comfortable taking an untested vaccine because the cure could be worse than the, prevention. So our best bet to fight the virus right now is to use existing medications and repurpose them against the virus. And of course, the key is then, again, this is an information problem, to find the right medication out of many possibilities. Okay? And so what's promising so far is anti-malaria medications, specifically hydroxychloroquine, Paquinil. And here's the thing, if that worked, it would explain two disparate observations. A, why have there been so few cases in high malaria areas? So as I said, very few cases in Africa and in countries in Africa and in India. Why? Because a lot of people there take the Plaquenil for decades against malaria. They have been prescribed billions and billions of doses. Second thing, why are kids so unlikely to die from this? By the way, I didn't mention this, but this is very unusual. Usually the flu takes the very young and the very old, the seasonal flu. This one doesn't. It doesn't affect kids at all in terms of mortality. So why? It seems to be the case, yeah, your fish tank will be safe, but don't eat the fish tank stuff because someone just died. They ate the fish tank cleaner, they died from that. So don't eat fish tank cleaner. So now with young, I mean under 10. With kid, I mean under 10. Anyway, so the people die from this in many cases by their own immune system is killing them. A cytokine storm comes from an overactive immune system, and Plaquenil suppresses that. That's why someone just mentions in the comments, people who have lupus are on that often anyway. So maybe people with lupus are going to be fine. The Spanish flu killed people in the mid-range, like 20-year-olds. Yes, just like the Spanish flu, yes. Anyway, let's talk about some evidence that hydroxychloroquine might help. And I want to be clear about this. This is the actual paper. It came out a week ago. No, not even. 3 days ago. This is the title. Hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin as a treatment of COVID-19. Results of an open label, non-randomized clinical trial. We'll talk about in a moment why that matters. And this is a group out of Marseille, France. So look at that. In black here is the control group. They didn't get the Plaquenil. And on the y-axis is percentage of cases with PCR positive samples. And the red ones here, they got the Plaquenil. Oh, look at that. After a week, by getting the Plaquenil, you can reduce the number of cases that have it by 2/3. If you combine that with azithromycin, yes, try not to take that if you have heart disease, or don't take too much of it. And then this is the combination where if you look at the green line here, after a week, 0% of the cases were still there. Now, let me tell you a couple of things that already came up in the comments. There are, because it was such a provocative paper, a lot of concerns have been raised, okay? Concerns are, this was a small sample size. There were 20 people in this treatment group, 20. The study design was ad hoc. The drug was not assigned randomly. It was not randomized. Something like 5 people dropped out of the treatment group because they had issues. They couldn't tolerate the drug. There's no error bars on this graph. The paper was not peer-reviewed. But I have to say, maybe this is the masks all over again. If you read the New York Post today, you saw there was an article that doctors, MDs are now hoarding this medication and prescribing it to their family members, just in case. And to be clear, to a point where people with lupus can't even get it anymore. This hoarding is already starting. But to be clear, this work is provocative enough for the CDC to now start a big, mass controlled randomized trial. If it makes sense. All right. Hello? All right. I want to give you, yeah, I've had a cough for like a month now. The cough pre-existed. But anyway, so some caveats. And by the way, I'm not going out or anything like that. Some caveats. We should be very wary of systematic biases in sampling, okay? You want to be very clear. Practically none of the data we have was sampled under experimental conditions randomly and independently. I'm going to tell you in a moment why that matters. So there's going to be likely to be massive selection effects and sampling biases, okay? And this is actually not my point. This guy, John Ioannidis, a statistical expert, came up with this. He published this a week ago. Let me tell you about the title and then tell you about his rationale. A fiasco in the making. As the coronavirus pandemic takes hold, we are making decisions without reliable data. And he is right, by the way. We are making decisions without reliable data. The problem is, if we wait until we have reliable data, it might be too late if we're wrong. But let me first give you his argument. His argument is this. The one situation where an entire closed population was tested was the Diamond Princess cruise ship and its quarantined passengers. The case fatality rate there was 1%, but this was largely elderly population in which the death rate from COVID-19 is much higher. So let me walk you through that rationale. If only serious cases are tested, it's possible the virus is already much more widespread than commonly believed. So the case fatality rate could be lower. So the only way to tell would be to test a large population that is randomly sampled. So to be clear, on the Diamond Princess, there's 3,711 passengers and crew. And as far as I know, all of them were tested. 712, or about 20% of them, tested positive. Scarily enough, about half of them were asymptomatic. They did not show any symptoms, but they still had the disease as per the test. 10 of them died, which implies a case fatality rate of 1.4%. And his argument is, who goes on cruises? Old and sick people. So if you look at this from the CDC, if you look at the rate, that group for the regular flu, this is for the regular flu, has a case fatality rate of about 1%, 0.83%. So his argument is like, this might be just like another flu on top of the regular flu that's going to kill a couple thousand people, but not millions, even if we do nothing. That is his argument. So to walk you through that again, we're only testing serious cases. So it's possible the virus is already much more widespread, so the CFR would be much lower. So the way to tell is to test a large randomly sampled population, but that's not going to happen until we have lots of tests available. So let me walk you through his point illustrated, okay? So look at that. Imagine we have 200 people, okay? 200 people, and they're all just sitting there. And they're all very close together, so they didn't do social distancing. So let's say half of them got sick. Here, the people that are now labeled in yellow, they got sick. The green are not infected. The ones in yellow have the virus. And let's say 10 of them. So 100 people, 200 people total, 100 not infected, 100 infected. 10 of them get a serious version of the disease, and one of them dies, okay? And if we have only a few tests available, then we're probably only gonna test these 10, the one with the serious symptoms, yes? That's what we that's what we did in early March in the US, that's what we did in Germany, Sweden, Japan. And let me tell you why that's a problem. The case fatality rate is calculated as how many people died divided by how many people tested positive. That's the ratio. And we can confirm that one person died and we tested 10. So our case fatality rate is 0.1, 10%. Yes? Everyone on board with that? Yes? No? Comments? Great. Now, imagine if we tested everyone. Same population. Not a single additional person got sick. But now the denominator changes. Now we tested everybody. And how many people tested positive? Let's say the test is perfect. Let's say half. 100. We caught all of them. Now our case fatality rate is 1%. Is that clear how testing everybody would drop the case fatality rate even if no one got worse sick or less sick or died or did not die? Yes, great. So his point is a valid point. If there is self-selection effects, then we don't know what the real case fatality rate is. Could be much lower than we thought. And just to be clear, this lack of testing isn't necessarily just lack of tests. It's also people who have a mild version of the disease. I don't think they want to go to the hospital and get tested there because they don't want to get the virus worse. They might not even know they have the virus. So there are also self-selection effects from the people themselves. So the only way to deal with this from a statistical perspective is to A, get a lot more tests, and B, do a random sample. And then the problem is, of course, compliance. Let's say someone shows up on your door and be like, yo, we're going to do a random corona check. You know, a lot of people might not open their door, and then we're no longer random. This might work better in China than in a free society. The second thing is that beware of spurious correlation. So for instance, this is on CNN. France says ibuprofen might aggravate the coronavirus, but experts are not convinced. So let me be clear. It is true that some people observe bad outcomes in patients who had taken ibuprofen. That is true. And in the Lancet, they wrote an article on like why that might be. In Switzerland, they talked about how the coronavirus enters the cells by binding to ACE2, and I already talked about this, and ibuprofen increases that enzyme. So they said maybe we should not be doing this. But you have the same problem. This was not an experiment. So can you think of a confound of what could what could show this difference, even if ibuprofen is ineffective, doesn't make it worse or better? What could be going on? Who's taking ibuprofen? Who is given ibuprofen? Yeah, people who are really sick, people who are already very sick. So ibuprofen could just be a marker for pre-existing conditions or a really sick or a really serious trajectory of the disease. Even if ibuprofen by itself is not. Someone just said yes, Tylenol does not show this. That is true. If you want to play it safe, take Tylenol. Of course, you can say, hey, Pascal, no one has ever done a randomized controlled trial of parachutes, and you'd be right. That's true. No one has ever done that, because if I say we're going to test if parachutes are effective, you're going to be in a control group, you probably wouldn't comply with that, right? All right.
So, but I want to end on a positive note, some silver linings. I do not believe there's any reason for panic. We do have a rational grasp on or off the situation. I'm not sure what the right grammar is. I'm not from around here. Is it on the situation or off the situation? But anyway, mitigation measures demonstrably work. I'm going to make two predictions right now. Prediction one, if we implement the measures we understand to work, catastrophic outcomes can likely be avoided. What do I mean by catastrophic outcomes? You know, breakdown of the economic system, millions of people dying. I don't think that will happen. Prediction two, as we implement these measures, the number of confirmed cases will go way up. As tests become available, we're going to have 100 million cases, maybe more. But the case fatality rate will either stay down or go down. I would not be surprised if it drops to 1 or below 1. And there's a lot to look forward to. Mass testing, as you saw, the US is now producing tests by, free enterprise. The CDC relinquished their monopoly on the test. Lots of companies are now producing ventilators. Ford just repurposed some plants. I understand Tesla is producing ventilators. People figured out how to jury rig existing ventilators so that 2 or 4 people can be on one. And if we say do the fourth thing, then all of a sudden you can turn 100,000 ventilators into 400,000 ventilators. Warmer weather is coming, and even if it's not as effective as you think it is, it's probably not going to hurt. And the treatments, we will find things that fight this virus. And maybe this combination between azithromycin and Plaquenil is already it. All right. And so more good news, even herd immunity might be attainable. There's a recent monkey study last week that showed rhesus monkeys do not get the disease again if they had gotten it before. They build immunity. So if you get the virus now, the disease now, you're probably not going to get it from the second wave in next winter, unless the virus mutates. But there's now evidence that just came out today, so it's not on the slide yet, that the virus has a very low mutation rate, much like the measles. So it's probably not going to change. If we develop a vaccine, it will be effective, probably. I am cautiously optimistic on a psychological level. Fighting the virus has given a lot of people a strong sense of purpose. As you probably have seen, at least in my experience, bickering about stuff that doesn't really matter is way down. That's at least my personal experience. I think, and this has been bothering me for at least 25 years, that we will have effective antivirals available to society, to civilization, much earlier than it would have been otherwise. In other words, that, I think it's kind of unacceptable on a society level scale that we don't have a cure for the common cold. Now that globally we'll probably allocate a couple of trillion to find one, maybe we will figure this out. So long term, I think due to improved hygiene habits, I'm certainly washing my hands more and probably going to keep doing that. Lower pollution, lower traffic, there's a chance that if we can avoid these catastrophic outcomes, the virus might actually save lives, both in the short and the long run, if that makes sense. I predict, for instance, that the next flu season will be much milder because people will be washing their hands more, probably wear face masks, things like that. So to summarize, and then we'll do the Q&A, it is a thorny situation, okay? We have to make decisions under profound uncertainty. It's not like we know what to do. This has never happened before, not in this form. I know people can talk about the Spanish flu 100 years ago, but there was no air travel. You had like a year to prepare. Now the virus is here right now from air travel. And nefariously, so this really is a perfect storm cognitively. Like our cognition is not built for this. We don't have a pseudo prior, and exponential growth works against us. We can't learn from personal experience what to do. So statistical reasoning is our best guide in the face of this situation, probability basically. And just to be clear, there are no great options available, okay? Like all options that we have are bad. Shutting the economy down is bad. Letting the virus run rampant is also bad. The name of the game is to avoid catastrophic outcomes. So just bad options and worse options. By the time we have the data, what the right thing to do was, it's going to be too late. We have to take action now. We can't wait for a year to see what we should have done. So we're kind of in a tragic situation.
But if we take this seriously now, I believe we can prevent more serious outcomes. Unless the medical system gets overwhelmed, the final case fatality rate might be much lower than we currently believe. At least that's what I believe. So ironically, it will then seem much less serious than it was. But if we don't act now, then we will have a catastrophic outcome. All right? So reality is, ironic like that. If we take it seriously, it's going to be less serious than it would be otherwise. If we don't take it seriously, it's going to be catastrophic. So I believe this simulation is winking at us again. Briefly, what can you do right now? A, don't panic. I do not believe there's any reason to be anxious. We have a rational grasp on the situation. We know what to do. Importantly, we do need your cooperation. So comply or die, okay? I need you to do the social distancing. I need you to do the hand washing. I need you to do the masks. Donate medical supplies if you have any. And what they need might be counterintuitive. This is actual footage of me donating my Crocs from my Croc study to an actual local ICU. The idea is that the nurses need them there because how do I say this? Like they can bleach them and keep them safe. All right. And yes, I did a Croc study. I'll post that later. All right. That's all I have.